Last week, we learned that the Jews that had been scattered all over the world was brought back to the land that God had given their forefathers and made one nation in Israel. Now, that fulfilled part of that prophecy, but not in Ezekiel 37, but not all that prophecy was fulfilled, because God went on to say that some of the people who were among those that went back to Israel in 1948 would be alive, and not only they, but would be alive and have their children and their grandchildren there when Jesus comes for the second time. Now, he says Israel will have been restored spiritually by the time that he comes back. So today, let's look at the rest of the story as to how this is going to come about. In Romans chapter 11 and in verse 11, it says, I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid, but rather through their fall, salvation has come to the Gentiles for to provoke them to jealousy. Then I'm going to jump down Romans 11 to verse 21 and read 21 through 26. This gives us the scenario. It says, if God spared not the natural branches, take heed lest he also spare not thee. Behold, therefore, the goodness and the severity of God. On them which fell, severity, but toward you, goodness. Otherwise, thou also shalt be cut off. They also, if they abide still, not still in unbelief, shall be grafted in. For God is able to graft them in again. For if thou wert cut out of the olive tree which is wild by nature, and were grafted into a good olive tree, how much more shall they be which the natural branches be grafted into their own olive tree? For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles come in. In plain words, Paul's saying that the blindness God has given Israel is not permanent, and the church age that we're now living in isn't either. So what will happen according to the signs that we're seeing is that the fullness of the Gentiles is about to occur. The fullness of the Gentiles refers to, of course, the church age. It's ending with the tribulation period beginning. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3 says, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. Simply put, when one person more is lost than will be saved, the rapture will occur. There's a prophecy in Daniel chapter 9. I'm going to just read the pertinent parts of it here today. Chapter 9, it tells us about the Antichrist, how he'll come on the scene, and how he'll make a covenant with many, and what's going to happen. And what happens at the very end of the church age, which is very interesting. Daniel chapter 9 and verse 26b says the church age will end with a devastating war. 26b says, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. Now the flood that's referred to here is not a flood of water, but a flood of men. In other words, it's going to end with an army attacking Israel. And then the next verse, first part of the next verse, 9:27a, it says, and he, that's the man of sin, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, which is, of course, 7 years. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. So, the next sign that we'll be looking for is that war. Now, the war is described in detail in Ezekiel 38 and Ezekiel 39, and it's a very devastating war. And I don't have time, I can't read that all here now. But of that war, in Zechariah 14, verse 12, it says the weapons that will be used in that war will cause a man's flesh to melt off his body before his corpse hits the ground. So it's going to be a nuclear war, and thermonuclear bombs will be used. Another clue is in Ezekiel 39:9, it says, "And they that dwell in the cities of Israel shall go forth and shall set on fire and burn the weapons of both the shields and the bucklers, the bows and the arrows, the handstand and the spears, handstave and the spears, and they shall burn them with fire 7 years." Now, this war won't only be waged in Israel. As you read the accounts, you'll see that in the homelands of the attackers, people will be killed as well by nuclear bombs. So there's going to be millions of people killed at this time. Now, by Israel burning the weapons of war that is left for them to clean up, as it says here, for 7 years, and the church age ending with this war, indicates to me that it'll happen just before the church age is raptured. In fact, we may not see it end, the church. I think we will see it begin. But rapture will happen during the chaos of that war. And probably not even make the evening news. I mean, the world will be torn upside down and in the most chaotic time that has ever been. And there'll be a few. Jesus says when he comes back, will he find faith on the earth? There's only going to be a few living Christians. Most of them will be dead. And the dead ones, of course, when they're raptured, won't make as the movies show, they won't, when they come out of the graves, it won't leave a hole. So I think that this rapture is far overblown by Hollywood in the chaos that it might bring. But at any rate, we will be raptured. And of course, that's just my opinion about the news. But at any rate, the Antichrist will come on the scene at that time. And he will seem like God himself to the world, because he'll pull it all together. Everything he does will improve the world situation that he finds, and he allows the Jews to rebuild the temple. The mosque that's on the property now that is preventing the Jews from rebuilding that temple probably be destroyed in that war, because it is a devastating war. So the Jews probably won't have a conflict rebuilding the temple when they do. At any rate, the Antichrist is going to approve it, and they will rebuild it. Now, remember, there's a remnant of Jews that were not blinded. God says he always has a remnant that's loyal to him on this earth. And you can read about them in Revelation. They'll preach the truth about the Antichrist during that 7-year period. They'll be protected by God as they preach, because if they weren't, of course, they would be killed in a minute. So, as the Antichrist when he gets to the end, the middle of the tribulation period, he breaks his word. He says, no, he has told the world they can worship the way they want and everything's fine. But now he goes to the temple, enters it, goes into the Holy of Holies, of course that's God's place, and desecrates that temple and proclaims himself to be God and insists on the world now worshiping him, and those that will not, of course, will be beheaded. Now, at that time, when he desecrates the temple, the Jews that have been laboring under the blindness that they've been given, that spirit of slumber, as God calls it, will be lifted. And those preachers, those 144,000 Jewish preachers that's been preaching the word, the true word, against the Antichrist during that first 3.5-year period, their words will be able to convince the Jews that Jesus is Messiah. And they will believe. And they will turn. And that's how, and that's when, that Israel will be spiritually restored. Now, God has a place for them to be kept safe, Israel, for the next 3.5 years after they make their commitment to the Lord. And you find that in Revelation 12:6. It says, and the woman denotes Israel, fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Of course, that's 3.5 years. The Jewish preachers, as I said, will be protected by God as well. You can read about that in Revelation 14. So that's the story. That's how Israel will be saved. And the people who were left behind at the rapture, which is everybody but the Jews, the Gentiles, will now, as Paul warned that they would, be given a strong delusion, and they will believe the lie. And that will be permanent. They will all be damned, those that were left behind. Now, there's no way I could read all the scriptures that bear out this story, but you need to read them for yourself, because there's a lot more to it than what I've been able to say today. But I'm going to just read off the references. Daniel chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12. Ezekiel 38 and 39. Zechariah 14. Romans 11. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and Revelation chapters 12, 13, and 14. So it's a lot of reading, but we need to read the Bible every day. And by reading those scriptures, you'll see this story be borne out. Next week, if there's enough interest in these things, I'm going to go from prophecy to the false teaching in the world. And because of the shortness of time, we need to understand and we need to know how to be sure that we're going to go to heaven when this rapture occurs. Thank you.